Everyone, I'm going to begin. Apologies for the delay in starting. We're looking at Homer's Odyssey, as I said to you last time, which is one of the great works of literature in any language. And I believe I mentioned last time that it is one of two works by Homer. I might not have said that. The first being the Iliad. And this is a sequel, if you will, but it's not like the first one in many ways. I'm going to talk a bit about the relations of the two works and their conjunction with a single event, which I did speak about last time in some detail, the significance of the Battle of Troy. Let me see if I can put Troy on the map here just to give you a sense. Go away. Maps. Oh, don't give me that. Although maybe do give me that. This is Troy. Now you get a sense of where we're at. Okay, so this is Troy. I'm sorry the screen doesn't go down here. A little odd. Troy is in the current city or current country of Turkey, modern-day Turkey. In the Greco-Roman world, it was often called Asia Minor. And it's a story of great significance in terms of other stories. A tale told by itself, which prompts the rise of a whole civilization, namely the Greeks, taught by Homer. He was regarded as the teacher of all Greece. Greece itself did not exist as a nation in the modern sense of a nation state. That didn't even exist until the 19th century. It was a collection of Greek-speaking city-states. Famous ones at that. You will recognize many of them from scripture, like Corinth and Athens. And others are mentioned, dotted in and around scripture. But there's a certain political life that's associated with the Greek city-state, which exalted freedom. And they have a certain tradition connected with freedom that they tell in conjunction with battles against Persia and so forth, which are led by a tyrant, powerful monarchs who deprive their own people of liberty and are often, has nothing to do with the civilizational accomplishment. Persia is a terrifically advanced civilization, but it deprives its citizens of freedom. Whereas the Greeks recognize whether you're in Athens, which tends to prize the mind, or Sparta, who are the famous warriors of old, in each city-state they will look to Homer as their teacher. It's a common ground. They have a common language, yes, but more than the language, it's their adherence to the teachings of Homer. That promotes a sort of a Greek civilization. The Pan-Hellenic League that united together against the Persians when the Persians sought to bring Greece under their heel, just like they had brought the rest of the world at the time. Mentioned in scripture, Greece, but although it's pretty marginal, as such, Alexander the Great is probably mentioned in Daniel 7, one of the beasts there. Most biblical commentators think it's a reference to, if they believe that prophecy is even possible, a reference to Alexander going forward about 400 years on from when Isaiah is written, or Daniel's written, rather. Alexander the Great slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. He was Alexander's teacher, in other words. Alexander was actually taught by another fellow you might have heard of. His name was Aristotle. Aristotle, who was taught by Plato, both of them who regularly made reference to Homer. Because Homer was regarded as the teacher, cultural influence for his entire civilization, and he probably lived around 800 BC, 400 years before Plato even writes, let alone lives, and 450 before Alexander the Great lives. The events told there are probably written down by Homer in 800 BC. Now, the events that Homer tells of go back long before that, probably about 1200 BC, the events that happen in Troy are described. So takes 400 years to write down the event. 400 years, how long is that? Well, just put it in terms of more contemporary chronologies. I don't know. Where does that put us in the English Civil War? Not quite yet. James the Sixth, or the First of England, the King James Bible. There it is, 400 years. It's a long time. What's the influence of the King James Bible on the English language? It's vast. Right? It's a translation from original documents in Greek and Roman, but into the English language, giving us an authority or the authorized version of the Bible. It has a similar sort of effect, writing this text down. Now, it was performed for a long time before that by different bards. It was an oral poem, and there are signs that this is an oral poem. I'll mention a few of those briefly. But originally this was probably told in stories, and the stories would be embellished upon and perfected by later writers, put to meter. It's written in a very particular type of meter called dactylic hexameter. It's got 6 dactyls. A dactylos is like your finger. It's got a long, and a short. The end of your finger is shorter than the other joints. So you get 2 long and a short syllables. That's 6 times in each line, and it gives a particular cadence to the line, and that's the meter. The meter is something that allows the poet who's memorizing it to remember it. It has a beat, if you will. You can do that through rhyme. Rhyme is a type of meter as well. It's at the end of the word, and you can hear it. It rhymes. Or you can do it through a cadence. That's what Homer has done here, and he's preserved it. And the length of the line allows him to give a lot more within the line. Like a hexameter is a long line, poetically speaking, and it's conducive to narrative. Doesn't work well in English. Writing dactyls in English is very difficult. I won't even try and explain it. I'll just say that for now. Shakespeare writes an iambic pentameter. An iamb is a short, unstressed syllable followed by a stressed. So just 2, right? So it's more compact, and it's only 5 beats then, shorter. But in English, Shakespeare's diction sounds like speech. It's close to it. You can tell story in it. And if you've ever seen Romeo and Juliet, the DiCaprio version, anyone ever seen that? Romeo, and it's put in gangland, Los Angeles and so forth, and they're actually speaking in Shakespeare's verse and just putting a little bit of accent on it and so forth. But you can still speak, and you can follow it. It sounds a little odd, but you get used to it after a while. And it works. Same here. And so the meter that Homer uses will be picked up by later poets. And as soon as somebody writes in dactylic hexameter, everyone says they're trying to be an epic. Like, that's how distinctive it is. It's not a common way of speaking. Homer also has a very specific speech patterns and particular words, Homeric vocabulary. By the time that Plato writes, a lot of those terms are obsolete. They don't use them. Just like King James Bible. It sounds archaic. It sounds really rich and it sounds beautiful, but we don't use that word anymore. Right? So there's that sense. But by the time Plato is reading this, and Aristotle and Alexander, it sounds like an enormously rich, important work, and beautiful. and it's memorized, and they recite it in halls. If you've ever seen The Lord of the Rings, where they have the King of the Golden Hall, Theoden, and so forth, and there's a bard, and he's singing, and everybody's gathered around. That's what you're going to have here. They'll have this in Anglo-Saxon areas as well. Most of the culture is not literate. And they are taught through hearing and remembering what they've heard. And the memory work is very important, because you can read anything. And these days when I ask people questions in class like this, I find that people do research. They go, and they tell me the answer that's first on the internet. I can do that myself, and that's not the purpose of the question. The question is whether you have it embedded in your own memory that you know the answer to the question. One of the problems of technology is it gives us a very easy way of accessing information and dispenses with the need to memorize it and actually know it. And it means that you're captive to the technology then. This is a problem. It's a problem for you. It's a tool with great power, the technology, by the way. But it does mean that you're using crutches all the time. The crutch of the technology. Now, these are super crutches. You can sort of bounce around and go all over the globe. It's terrifically powerful. But it never develops your own mind in the same way. And so, interestingly, I'm going on rabbit trails already. Plato writes in his 7th letter that if he had his druthers, nothing would ever be written down. It would be only memorized. Because it's when you memorize it that you internalize it, and it becomes a part of you. As opposed to being something that you hear performed, it becomes something that you know. And hence, people often memorize scripture so that you can recall it. You don't have to look it up on your app, as useful as that is. It's right there. And the words are then in your heart, and they have a peculiar effect on you. I'm a strong advocate of memorization for this reason. Anyway, that was a rabbit trail. The point of the story there is to say that Homer initially would have been recited in halls orally, and as time went by, there was a decision made, we need an authorized version of this. Like, there's a few variations. Let's have a real historical account of what happened there. And it was written down by Homer. And this story then was passed on down through myth and legend. And one of the questions, and became vastly influential. I've already talked about how it influenced Alexander, and I could talk about Rome and the rest of Western culture and beyond that, but I'll skip that for now. The point is that when this happens, and it is disseminated in that way, it has a hold on the Greek imagination, and it creates a particular type of people. They hold to particular views of the world. They have a worldview, if you will. They have a certain view of the gods. They have a certain view of how to behave towards strangers. They have a certain view of the underworld. And this is one of the things that makes it an epic, by the way. An epic tells us about heaven, it tells us about the underworld, and it tells us about the earth. It also gives a whole account of human history within it. So later writers will call this encyclopedic. It tells you everything about everything. And so Homer was regarded as a sort of godlike figure, inspired by the gods, to tell us a story which will not just tell us about Odysseus, but also acquaint us with what's going on in the realm of the gods, what's going on in the realm of the dead, what's going on historically, and where it will all end up ultimately. There's a holistic sense. It's a very grand story. And in fact, if I use the word epic, immediately you get that sense of a long, important narrative that we hold to this day. But there are features to the epic that go beyond just simply a long narrative poem. Although if you look it up in a dictionary, it'll say a long narrative poem, which is an underwhelming definition. Like the latest movie that you see, you can say, oh, that's epic. Okay. Right? Sure. But what about this thing that we call an epic here? It is a long narrative poem, but there's so much more to this long narrative poem than simply a long narrative poem. It really is not helpful at all. It's acquainting us with as I say, a worldview of the Greeks, and that worldview is regarded as not only important to the Greeks, but as true and good. And it represents justice, and it upholds beauty, and it presents to us wisdom. In fact, the goddess who leads our hero Odysseus in this story is none other than the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom. She inspires Odysseus. She is his celestial patron, if you will. She's guiding him. She sometimes disguises herself. So there's more emphasis on the Odyssey in the Odyssey on wisdom than there is in the Iliad. There it's slightly different. I'll talk about that in a sec because I said I was going to compare it. Let me take a brief question, but yes. Possibly. The question was, is Athena related to Ishtar? Ishtar was the Babylonian goddess. But Ishtar, to answer, now that I think about it, no, it's not Ishtar. No. Ishtar is Artemis in Greek mythology, which is mentioned in Scripture as well. But no, not quite the same. Another goddess, yes.
Quick question about Athena. It mentions that she's Pallas, I think?
Pallas Athena, yeah. It's an association of a place and so forth.
Oh, okay.
They often have, you'll find that they have one name, and then sometimes the place where they're venerated gets thrown into it.
Oh, okay.
And it's not somebody different, it's the same goddess. We're citing the association for some reason. One of the reasons for the poet is to preserve the meter.
Got it.
I need to keep the meter in this line. It's Pallas Athena. Sometimes you can figure it out. It actually has a meaning. Sometimes as well. The meaning is it's useful to throw it in here. She also always has white arms. I'll leave that aside for the moment. Yes?
I might have answered my own question, but Ishtar she's referred to as the goddess as well as Venus.
Yes.
Moon, but in Roman culture, it was also Aphrodite. The Greek version.
You're right. It's not Artemis. It's
Aphrodite.
It's Aphrodite.
Yeah.
And that's relevant because she's the other goddess on the other side. She's the Romans' deity.
Well, what confuses Ishtar is that Ishtar is also the god of fertility, which Artemis was the god of fertility.
Yes, but then she was a virgin, so
It's weird, but
yeah, it certainly is. Now, it's the story of the origins of the gods and their various attributes are thoroughly confusing. It's like building an ancient city, and it's a city on top of a city. There's a myth on top of a myth, and they have different strands, and they don't seem to fit. They are contradictory even. If you're interested in that, Robert Graves has a compendium of Greek mythology, and you can read the various myths associated with gods and places and so forth. They're really interesting. But you'll find that it's like there's a whole long story behind certain figures that comes from many different sources, and they sometimes are totally contradictory. Yeah, maybe that's why I got confused about first. But you're right, it's Aphrodite is Ishtar. Yeah. That's important when you read C.S. Lewis, but let me not get down that path for now. So the Odyssey is about the figure Odysseus. He is one of the heroes of the Trojan War, and he is the one famous for having constructed the ruse that brings down the Trojans, namely the Trojan horse. It was his wiles which led the Greeks to produce this crazy gift, which for some reason the Trojans accepted. Maybe they've been hit too many times on the head in battle. In a big wooden horse. Oh, what could be wrong with this? A big wooden horse, you know. And did I hear something inside that horse? No. You can't. I've heard that. But he comes up with the ruse. The Greeks are inside the wooden horse. At night, they come out of the wooden horse, and then they overthrow the Trojans. How long does it take for that to take place? 10 years. They fight for 10 years. So the Iliad is the account of the Trojan War. Now, we're not reading the Iliad. It's the account of the Trojan War from the beginning. What began the war? What began the war? A wager amongst three goddesses. And who were they? Aphrodite, Athena, and Hera. Yes. Sometimes called, in Romans called Juno. Three goddesses. Which one of us is fairest? It's at a wedding. There, a man is asked, which one of us is fairest? Now, when goddesses who are immortal ask you to answer a riddle, you're in deep trouble. Particularly, which one of us is fairest? You're going to win and lose. Someone's going to be happy and the other two are not going to be happy. It was a man named Paris who was asked this. He decided that, and they offered a reward. If you choose me, I'll give you whatever you want. Athena offers him wisdom, of course. Note how he didn't take Solomon's choice. Juno offers him power. Aphrodite offers him the most beautiful woman on earth. Paris is a bad man. He's moved by his passions. He wants the woman. So he gets her. Unfortunately, she happens to be married to another man. And that starts the Trojan War. It all began with a little quarrel amongst the goddesses, or which one of us is fairest. That story, by the way, is at the end of the Iliad. It's not told at the beginning. It's just sort of embedded in the narrative way towards the end. But that starts the whole war that begins amongst the goddesses. The goddesses are really angry that this girl thinks that she's prettier than I am. How dare she? And then they both bring their people into the war over it. So there's a battle of the gods, and this is going to say something about the nature of the gods in Homer's world, which is going to be criticized by Plato, which is that he portrays gods and goddesses as like really bad kids. They're motivated by greed, vanity, lust. They lie, they steal, they cheat, they commit adultery, they do everything. Everything that we would say an immoral person, the gods do in Homer's Odyssey. Plato will say there's no gods that would do such things. You don't know what you're talking about. But I'll get to that in a couple weeks. But it begins with a battle amongst the gods. And the battle amongst the gods is then played out in the context of the story amongst the human beings that take. And the chief of those are called heroes. And they're demigods. They have one divine parent and one human parent. These are people that no longer walk the earth. But Achilles was one, and so is Odysseus. Favored by the gods, or a god for this reason. When I say they have a divine parent, sometimes it's just a nymph. When I say just, they're also immortal. But they're not one of the Olympian gods. So it all takes place in this place called Troy. I'm coming back in. And as I say, it's part of a myth and legend. And one of the questions in the history of the West is, how historic is this event? Is it just a story that somebody made up? There were various theories around this, by the way. But in general, by the 19th century, it was accepted that this was a myth, and it was totally made up. There was no historical basis for it whatsoever. And why is that? Well, have a look here. Where is Troy? How near is it to the sea? It's a long way away. And so the Battle of Troy is said to take place on the Mediterranean. It's not on the Mediterranean. The place doesn't exist. It was discovered that water is receding, and from a biblical perspective, you would say from the time of the flood, and might have something to do with it, and that actually the city of Troy might be found further from the shore than we would have thought originally. Some archaeologists in the 19th century go looking for it, and a man by the name of Heinrich Schliemann eventually takes credit for the discovery. I think it was an Englishman who found it first, but Schliemann was smarter and got his name put on it. And he found the city of Troy. And as you can see here, it exists only in this form. And what he finds is a city on top of a city on top of a city on top of a city, as is often the case in the ancient world. And in those ruins, he finds other things, among which are artifacts which are now in the Pergamum Museum in Germany. And what do I want to do? What's his name? Give me images. You can see these things. And what is this? Mask of the Dead. But golden, you also find one from Agamemnon and so forth. At any rate, and there are marble friezes taken right off Pergamum and so forth. But at any rate, he finds inscriptions and so forth which depict that this was a historic city, and that the figures here, the armor is left from that era. Validating the, by that point, rather peculiar and some say whimsical idea that Troy actually was a place and not just a legend. You could say similar things about the book of Exodus, which some people think is a myth without basis. And I think there's ample evidence for that particular event as well. But this one was found as a historical place, and then but that's not the importance of the event. The importance of the event is not a 10-year war between Greeks and Trojans. The importance of the event is the retelling of it and the significance attributed to the event. So I want to say two things there. One, the historical event did happen probably about 1200 BC, but it only became of such magnificent significance when somebody wrote it down and attributed legendary qualities, gave it the epic machinery that we currently have in the poem that we have. So, and the reason I raise this is when you study literature, one of the questions, one of the reasons people dislike literature is they say it's all fiction. It's all stories, but it's not based on truth. And I'm interested in nonfiction. I want the reality, I don't want the fiction. Don't give me the story about it. The battle that took place at Troy is of far less significance than the significance attributed to the Battle of Troy. And it will hold on to good, true, real, beautiful things. So much so that it'll spawn the Greek civilization, which will influence the Roman civilization, which will influence the Christian civilization, etc. So what I'm going to want to look at in our 4 class study in the Odyssey is what is it that Homer upholds about the gods, about the underworld, about human conduct, that becomes so influential that we hold on to it and we prize Homer as the great epic writer of all, the greatest epic writer of all writers. Because that's what I would hold. I think Milton's greater in some ways. I'll get to him next semester. But in some ways, Milton is inconceivable without Homer. In fact, he is. So let me begin with the beginning. So look at this. Anyone been to Troy? I have not. But way up there, in the heights. I'll pull back out of that and leave that for now, but you can see it's right there in Asia Minor. Let's start with the poem itself. I'm going to read a little bit and talk about the features of an epic poem. Okay, so that's what the features of an epic poem, but we'll begin with just the first few lines. Almost every story that's worth telling begins well, with memorable lines. Homer's is one of those. Nope, that goes too much. Let me make sure this is actually the same account. And you're going to find that actually I read a fair bit of the poem in my classes. I find that the hearing of it, if it's read reasonably well, brings it to life. Tell me, Muse, of the man of many ways who was driven far journeys after he had sacked Troy's sacred citadel. Many were those whose cities he saw, whose minds he learned of, many the pains he suffered in his spirit on the wide sea, struggling for his own life and the homecoming of his companions. Even so, he could not save his companions, hard though he strove to. They were destroyed by their own wild recklessness. Fools who devoured the oxen of Helios, the sun god, and he took away the day of their homecoming. From some point here, goddess, daughter of Zeus, speak and begin our story. So who's the speaker here in the poem? Yeah, the speaker is Homer. Who does he speak to? Sure. No, not in this. Sorry? A muse, yes. It is a muse, and he addresses it as the muse. Who are the muses? Does anyone know what the muses are? Sure.
Aren't there like 4 or 5 of them?
9.
9, okay. And they're deities of like art and music?
Yes. So they are the 9 daughters of a goddess called Memory. And the particular muses are connected with particular arts. So there's an epic muse, there's a muse of history, there's a muse of music, etc. There's a muse of astronomy. So it's a realm of knowledge which requires us to draw on our memories. Remember, these are the daughters of Memory, and he's appealing to this particular epic muse to remind him of what he already knows. But there's something fundamentally humble about this, insofar as he's not just saying, I remember. Let me tell you a story. I think that's how a modern storyteller would begin. Once upon a time, or let me tell you a story. That there once was a man, or just begin the story. Here he appeals to a goddess above him to help him to tell a story that he already knows. He's memorized the story, but he's still going to acknowledge that it's not his story. It's a divine story of sorts. And this is called the Invocation of the Muse, by the way, the convention. Invocation. He's going to call into the story the Muse. To help him. And he calls him to help of this man whose name is Odysseus, a man of many ways. Odysseus is not a straightforward character. Modern heroes, probably influenced by Christianity, you expect them to be blunt, straight talkers. Odysseus is not a straight talker. And he has many ways of getting to the same outcome. He thinks about them. You can touch your nose in a couple of ways. You can go like this, or you can reach around and you can touch it. Okay. There are different ways. He has many ways of doing the same thing, and he thinks around the issue. He doesn't just immediately react. He thinks, and then he acts. And there are many different ways of getting things done, depending on context. And Achilles is one type, also wise, by the way, but Odysseus is particularly renowned for wisdom among all of the Greeks, most like Athena. So there's a particular way in a particular context to say the right thing. And Odysseus is a model for this. And when I say that he's a model, he's more than a model. He is a hero. Another feature of an epic, it has a hero. And the hero is a role model for everybody who is reading the story. So these are exemplary figures. They're not just figures to entertain you, they're figures for you to follow if you also wish to have the attributes of the characters concerned. So if you want to be wise, be like Odysseus. He's not the only figure that represents wisdom here, by the way, in the story. So does his wife, and so will his son to some degree, and so even will one of his lowest servants. But I'll come to that later, not give away everything right at the outset. But he invokes the Muse, first feature of an epic poem. It's a long narrative poem. It has a hero. It invokes the Muse. And when it invokes the Muse, it calls upon the Muse to then tell the story. And what happens after that is who's telling the story? Is it Homer, or is it the Muse telling the story? Tell me, Muse. From some point here, goddess, daughter of Zeus, speak and begin our story. Whose voice is this? Could be the Muse. He asks her to do it, and then it starts going. It's the Muse telling the story. In other words, there's divine inspiration being claimed in the story. It's not, if you're telling your own story about an account, you don't appeal to a Muse and get the Muse to tell it for you. This is something that he's retained, put into memory. It's worthy of being held on to. It's not like a note that you've scribbled somewhere or an account. It's so important that you've memorized it, and then you're going to pass it on to other people, recited it to the point where they have now memorized it. That's how important it is. I mean, it's not a short poem. And it wasn't just Homer that thought this. All the Greeks then came to the same mind that, yes, this is so important, we have to memorize it. So the first 10 lines are the invocation of the Muse, and he asks the goddess, daughter of Zeus, to speak and begin our story. Then the story begins. Then all the others, as many as fled sheer destruction, were at home now, having escaped the sea and the fighting. This one alone, longing for his wife and his homecoming, was detained by the queenly nymph Calypso, bright among goddesses, in her hollowed caverns, desiring that he should be her husband. But when in the circling of the years that very year came in which the gods had spun for him his time of homecoming to Ithaca, not even then was he free of his trials, nor among his own people, but all the gods pitied him, except Poseidon. He remained relentlessly angry with godlike Odysseus until his return to his own country. Lots of information given here, which I want to take a brief instant to look at here. Note that he is there because it has been fated that he remain there. Where is this word? There it was. It's not fated. There's a time of his homecoming that's been spun by the fates. There are 3 fates. One of them marks the beginning of your life, one pulls it out, stretches it out, and the third cuts the cord. That's the end of your life. The length of a person's life is predetermined, fated. You may not exceed the bounds of the life that's prescribed for you in advance. There is no way of escaping it. And the gods themselves have no control over fate. This is one of the things I want you to... It's really striking, because we're talking about gods and goddesses, and we'll look at the influence of the gods and goddesses. Remember, I said the whole Battle of Troy began as a quarrel between the 3 goddesses over who was the fairest of them all, and the golden apple that he threw in the midst of this and all this stuff. But they have no control over what's been fated. Fate is above the gods. In other words, the gods are not really gods as we would understand God at all. From a Christian perspective, the God of the Bible is the author of history from the beginning to the end, and he's not bound by it. He stands outside space and time. The gods in Homer's account are finite beings. They're in a particular place and a particular time. They're immortal, but they're immoral. But they're a lot like people. They're immoral, they have great powers, they can change shapes, they have certain abilities, they can strike you dead. You know, superpowers, a little bit like the Marvel type gods, you know, a little bit like that. That's another topic entirely. I won't get down that right now. We can talk about that later. But they are bound by fate. Now, he has been kept. He's the only one that hasn't returned from the Battle of Troy. So remember I said there was a 10-year battle, and then it ended because Odysseus tricked the Trojans, and the city of Troy fell into the Greeks' hands, and now the rest of them have taken the goods from this and gone back to their cities. They've all returned home, all except one, Odysseus. And how long is he kept from getting home? Another 10 years. That timeline is important. He's been away 20 years. The reason it's important is we're about to meet his son, whose name is Telemachus, and he's 20 years old, and he's never seen his father. Actually, he's probably 19, but he's never seen his father. When he was born, his father was long gone. He was in Troy fighting. And his father is, for him, a legendary figure. Everyone talks about the great Odysseus, and that this is the son of Odysseus. And so he is famous just by dint of being the son of the great Odysseus. But he's never seen his father, and he doesn't know how to measure up to such a great man's legacy. How can I be a man like Odysseus? Some people even say he looks like him. You know what? You can look like a man. That doesn't make you the man. What's inside you is what makes you the man, and he's never been taught to do that. So when we first meet him, we'll meet him very shortly here, we find a broken young man who has grown up fatherless. Now, this is a very interesting aspect of the story. Not many people reflect on this, but it is to some degree a story. Remember I said it's encyclopedia. It's teaching something about the importance of being a father, and that being a father figure. It's so important that the goddess Athena is going to stick a figure in the path of Telemachus, who is a father figure for him. The name of that figure is mentor. You ever heard of a mentor? Is that a biblical word? No, is the answer. It's not in Scripture. But mentoring is all around in Christian circles. You need to be a mentor. You're looking for a mentor. You're looking for a figure of wisdom, usually an old man. That's how he is here. Mentor is Athena, the female goddess, disguises herself as a wise old man. And the wise old man is going to tell Telemachus what he should do and give him she's going to lead by example. By the way, this is essential to wisdom in the Greek conception, is not to know things, but to do things. She's going to tell him to get up and go and leave. Get out of from under his mom's skirts, and to stop crying about the fact that he's never met Odysseus. You go find him. Go look for him. This encapsulates the Greeks' view of education, by the way, which is contained in the word paideia. Write this on the board so I don't rip this off. Bring this all down. No, that's not very good. This is really purple. Let's see. Paideia. I just used the word encyclopedia, which contains the word paideia. Does this word come up in Scripture anywhere? You're not going to know this. Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, educate your children in the fear and admonition of the Lord. The first word there is not fear, it's paideia. Paideia nouthesia uses this word paideia. It's to give a culture, to pass on a cultural inheritance. It's to educate, but it's to educate by example. It's to do it in every sphere of life. It's not to convey academic knowledge, the things you needed to learn and write down in the classroom. It's to how to speak in certain contexts, act in certain contexts. It's in the context of Scripture, though. He's using a Greek word, is Paul, but he's plucking it from a Greek inheritance in which education is total. It involves what you know, but also how to act, how to behave. It's built on Deuteronomy in terms of Scripture, Deuteronomy 6. Let me come to this. NIV, this will give it to me. Quick. Oh, come on. Boy, that's slow. What did Jesus say was the greatest commandment? He was asked. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, right? Where did he get it from? Right here, Deuteronomy 6. He's quoting it. Okay, what's the context for Jesus citing the greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself? Where is he getting that from? The first bit is right from here, from Deuteronomy 6. Who's the context for Deuteronomy 6? The Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. Context of love, teaching to the children. Okay, what does that mean? Shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. They shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and your gates. Okay, I could do a sermon on this, and I have done sermons on this. What is it? Where are you to teach them? Everywhere. At home, the domestic sphere, the private sphere, it's at home, right? Where else is it? Well, when you walk, so when you go out just ambling about, when you lie down, when you rise, in other words, in the morning and the evening, all the time. You write them as a sign on your hand. Why on your hand? Because your hand is the thing you do things with. It's your deeds. It will accompany your deeds. The knowledge of the Lord will be there with you in everything that you do. Where else will it be? Well, it'll be between the frontlets of your eyes, everything that you see. The word of the Lord and the love of the Lord will be with you as you look at other things. It's with you all along, right? And where else will it be? On the doorposts of your house. Okay, so that is your private square. It'll also be on your gates. In other words, the city. It will mark, so the love of the Lord will be civic as well as private. Okay, all of that underlies the word paideia. When Paul writes it, he has a Hebraic sense of the love of the Lord being brought into education. Now here we're just digging back with Homer. But note the importance of a mentor, and note that wisdom meets Telemachus in his house, and she's going to tell him to leave his house and give him an example to follow there. My point here is that education is not just academic knowledge for the Greeks. And Paul doesn't mean it to be that either. Oh, Paideia, it's translated as fear. How come? Because the pedagogue was often a very strict figure that terrified children. The whip. Make sure that they actually did their homework or whatever. A pedagogue going to drive you on. But a pice is a little child. A pediatric needle, you give it to children. Pediatrician is a child doctor. An encyclopedia is everything that a child needs to know. All those words have the word paideia in there, by the way. Isn't that interesting? Or pice. It's for just a little one. But it is to bring them so that they're no longer children and they act like adults. How do you do this? Well, here's the path, right here. Comment at the back or a question. I'm not getting far into this today. But yes? I can't hear you. It's translated in 100 different ways. They don't know what to do with it. It says paideia in Greek. And the second word is nouthesia. And the nouthesia, the nouth means your mind, the nous. And it's to set your mind differently. It's probably Romans 12:2 type stuff, to be transformed. There is no English equivalent for what it's saying there. So translated, you'll find it's wildly differently translated in the English. They just don't know what to do with it. Exactly. I don't know why they say fear. Other than the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 1:7. So maybe that's why. But the word is actually Paideia. So it's not fear. Anyway, so he has been detained, our friend Odysseus, by a nymph whose name is Calypso, and she's keeping him from getting home. Is it because he's entertaining company? No, she wants him to be her husband, and he has a wife. Now, what's the conflict going on here? Why does he want to get home?
See his family.
Sure. And? Yeah?
Because the guys who are after his wife are eating up all of his...
He doesn't know that.
Oh, okay.
We know that. He doesn't know that. He has no idea.
Is it because Helen is such a beautiful, awesome woman?
Well, it's not Helen, it's Calypso, though. But she's a goddess, and she's probably more beautiful than Helen. That.
Isn't Helen Odysseus' wife?
No,
Oh, okay. Who's his
Penelope.
Is it because his wife is so awesome?
Well, she's no comparison to Calypso.
But he's been gone for
20 years.
It's a long time. So
She's not looking so good now, though. 20 years have passed. And she's aged. It's 20 years. Calypso is an immortal goddess. She is beautiful, and her beauty will not fade. And she gives him ambrosia, the food of the gods, which will make him immortal. He will never age. So he will be with a woman who represents every physical pleasure and beauty eternally. That's what he could have if he's with Calypso. He doesn't want to be with Calypso. How come? I've just upped the ante here. How come? It's not because his wife's so pretty, because she's not prettier than Calypso. I'll add to the stakes the Greek city-state, and this includes figures like Odysseus and Achilles. They want to be famous. They want their reputation to pass into, when they die, they want people to still be talking about them. And they want men like themselves to celebrate the men that they were. They want themselves to be legendary figures. That's why they live their lives. If you've ever seen the movie Gladiator, I'm just trying to reach for current examples. If you haven't seen it, it's not going to mean anything to you, but at the beginning of it, Maximus, the Roman general, they're about to go down on the barbarians, and they're riding down on cavalry, and they think they're going to die, potentially. And they said, okay, but our deeds echo into eternity. So if you see yourself and the fields are bright, and he said, you're already dead. But what matters is how you die. Everyone's going to die. How will you die? Will people remember you for what you do? Homer's heroes all want to be remembered for being great men. This is his problem. At the moment, he didn't get home. He didn't get home. He's the hero, but nobody knows how his story ends. His story, he's lost. His wife mourns him. His son mourns him. Everybody talks about how great he was, but they wish they knew what happened to him. At the moment, his story is not complete, and he has not brought the treasure back home. At the moment, he's still a failure. He has not succeeded fully. To the full measure of his greatness, he has not yet come home with the prizes, with the treasure, which will symbolize his greatness and complete his story. And here's what the first lesson Homer's Odyssey is teaching us, and it's not explicit, but it's implicit, is that Odysseus values honor more than sex, and more than pleasure, and more than beauty. He loves and wants honor. And it's part of his arete, his excellence, is that he aims for this and everything else will be put in the second place. He's willing to endure hardship to achieve his excellence, and nothing will stand in his way of that. That's what motivates Achilles as well. He will not fight because he's been dishonored. Yes?
So would you say that like he valued honor over like value of family or like value of conscience?
I would. Here's the word, by the way. And yet it contains all those things. Conscience, valor, family. It's tied up with his family. Here's a family with no father. That's a broken family. If he values his family, he's going to return home to his family. While he's away, his kingdom is in disarray. The suitors are eating him out of house and home. His home has been devastated. So he goes away and he conquers Troy, and his own kingdom has been conquered in his absence. What sort of hero attends to a victory over here and gets defeated at home? Not a very good one. That's not a good story. He's going to come home and he's going to deal with the injustice at home as well as the injustice done there. So he does value his honor above family and riches and fame, but all those things are included in it. He wants all of them. It's part of his arete, his excellence. One of the manifestations of that is physical treasure. So he's going to come back home and you're going to see they load him up with gold more than he won at Troy, because those are a sign that he's a great man. At the moment, he's got none of them. He's going to lose all of them. He's not even going to have the clothes on his back in a few chapters. Going to be shipwrecked and the clothes torn off his back. And he's going to lose every companion. We read that there right at the beginning. They all die. What a story. But he values his arete more than any other thing. He is not going to be deflected by any promise of a lesser thing. He wants it all. Not even eternal life with the goddess who represents beauty and pleasure for him. That's not enough. And so what Homer's audience is immediately seeing is, here is a man who is better than the rest of us. He's better. This is not a man like us. Most men, after 10 years, shipwrecked, whatever, you can't get home. You have no idea where home is. Here is Calypso offering you everything that she offers. Are you not going to settle for that? Most men will. But not the hero of this story. This hero will not settle for that. He has a better aim than that. But and what's interesting is this is all fated. His time has not yet come to come home. There's a time period, and there's a sense of we don't want to say providence because there's no actual benevolent God orchestrating event. It's fated. It's blind. It's not. It just is so. And the gods have no way of changing it, by the way. The Olympian gods, we're going to meet the Olympian gods, Zeus and Athene and so forth. We're just about to meet them. They can't change what's fated. And this is why I say that the Olympian gods are not gods as we associate God. We associate God with omnipotence. They have nothing of the sort. They do not have that sort of power. All they do is they have superpowers, but they're not omnipotent. And even Zeus can't prevail over the rest of the gods if they're against him. He can't. So that's another thing we see here. But he is far from him, and all the gods pity him except Poseidon. We're going to find out about that in, I think it's book 11. Why Poseidon? Poseidon is really angry at him. Really angry. The earth shaker. And he's the reason why Odysseus takes 10 years to get back. One god. So let me read on. But Poseidon was gone now to visit the far Ethiopians. Ethiopians, most distant of men. You know where Ethiopia is. Down here. Most distant of men. Well, it says something about the ancient world. That's the furthest. They don't know anything beyond the Mediterranean area. Ethiopia is somewhere down in North Africa, Northeast Africa. That's the most distant of men. Who lived divided. Some at the setting of Hyperion. Some at his rising. So it's a big, wide country. to receive a hecatomb of bulls and rams. It's not Ethiopia, by the way. It's the whole breadth of Africa then, from east to west. That's considered Ethiopia all the way along there. There he sat at the feast and took his pleasure. Meanwhile, the other Olympian gods were gathered together in the halls of Zeus. First among them to speak was the father of gods and mortals. For he was thinking in his heart of stately Aegisthus, whom Orestes, Agamemnon's far-famed son, had murdered. Remembering him, he spoke now before the immortals. Okay, so this is probably going to be my final extended interruption here. It's not an interruption. A story is told, and it is an important story. First point, Poseidon's away. So while Poseidon's away, we can get Odysseus home without him knowing about it. If he's here, it's not going to happen. So quick, Poseidon's away, let's do it. And Poseidon's going to be really angry about the betrayal, and they're going to have to appease him. They'll be, politicians deal. We'll never do that again. For now, he's away, so now we can trick him. And come on, let's get him home, because it's fated, and we feel really sorry for Odysseus, whatever. But we hear from whom? The father of gods and mortals, Zeus. And what is he thinking about? He's thinking about another story. And one of them is Agamemnon. Now, who is Agamemnon?
Uniter of Greece during that time?
He's the leader of the Greek princes. So there's a bunch of, I mentioned the cities. So Achilles has one city, and Odysseus has his city of Ithaca. There are sort of princes, and then there's other figures, their retinues and so forth. But Agamemnon is the chief of these. His brother is Paris, whose wife, is it Paris, or am I confusing? Menelaus, pardon me, of course. Menelaus is the one whose wife, Helen, was taken. And so some see Agamemnon as a sort of a conniving political figure. He wanted to go after Troy anyway, and now he has his excuse. His brother's wife has been taken. He's dishonored all the Greeks. Let's go get him, guys. Agamemnon's the chief of the Greeks at any rate. He comes home to his wife and finds that she is committing adultery. So there's a story here that, oh no, that would be unfortunate. It says washable. Oh dear. I want to use the purple one again.
Did you use hand sanitizer?
Hand sanitizer? Okay, I'll do that after. I'll write it next time. I'll get my own. There's a parallel here between Agamemnon on the one hand and Odysseus on the other. And his wife, her name is Clytemnestra. As I say, I'll write it down next time. And Odysseus' wife, his name is Penelope. There's the one that she, namely Clytemnestra, betrays Agamemnon with. His name is Aegisthus. That's the lover. On the side of the Odysseus' account, there are the suitors who are trying to take his wife away. And then there's the son who was at home. And what did he do? Agamemnon's son murdered or took justice into his own hands, and he killed Aegisthus and his mother. That is the story embedded within this whole story. And Zeus is very happy that he did this. He's very happy because because of the terrible injustice that had been done there. Now, I don't want to get into all that. He killed his mother and so forth. There are tragedies written about Clytemnestra, and it's a very complicated story that the Greeks spend a lot of time on. But it's his son, Orestes, who is praised here. Did I read this? No, I didn't. Not yet. Okay. Far from sight, whom Orestes, Agamemnon's far-famed son, had murdered. Let me continue to read. What page? It doesn't even give me the line. I'll just read this then. Line number. Remembering him, he spoke now to the immortals. Oh, for shame, how the mortals put the blame upon us, gods. For they say evils come from us, but it is they, rather, who by their own recklessness win sorrow beyond what is given. Now, isn't this interesting? I said everything was fated, except that it seems like you can make things worse. You can't really make them better, but you can make them worse. Here's the lot of men. Things are fated to be a certain life. You can't extend your life, whatever. But you can actually make your fate worse than it was meant to be. You can't make it better, but you can make it worse. That's not a good state of affairs. It can only go downwards. And that's what the men do, and then they blame the gods for it and fate, when it's their own actions. This is Zeus's view of the matter. They blame us. As now lately, beyond what was given, Aegisthus married the wife of Atreus' son. Atreus' son is Agamemnon. He marries his wife and murdered him on his homecoming. So there's the problem. Agamemnon came home from the Trojan War, the victor at the Battle of Troy, and he gets murdered as soon as he comes home. What's the threat to Odysseus when he gets home? He's going to be murdered by the suitors. Betrayed by his wife, murdered by the suitors. What will his son do in the response? So it's a story that is like a foil for the plot of the Odyssey. And the god, Zeus, praises him for what he does do. Note, though, that Aegisthus, the adulterer, was warned, though he knew it was sheer destruction, for we ourselves had told him, sending Hermes, the mighty watcher, Argefontis, the slayer of Argos, not to kill the man, nor court his lady in marriage, for vengeance would come on him from Orestes, son of Atrides. If you do this, Agamemnon's son is going to kill you. You will not enjoy the fruits of your adultery. You will be murdered for this if you do this. So don't do it. Leave her alone. He does it anyway. Vengeance would come on from Orestes, son of Atrides, whenever he came of age and longed for his own country. Here it is. Whenever he came of age and longed for his own country. Now that's the backdrop for we're just about to meet Telemachus. He's come of age. And he's longing to be an adult. He wants his own sense of responsibility. He's tired of hearing he's Odysseus' son. I'm so sick of that. I am not the son of Odysseus. I am Telemachus. Right? But what does that mean? I don't even know how to act like a man. So this is being put here at the beginning. So Hermes told him, but of all these kind intentions, he could not persuade the mind of Aegisthus, and now he is paid for everything. He's paid by dying, as was predicted. That story, as I say, is not just a random story. It will be told repeatedly. You'll hear the same story told, and it's a way of dramatically foreshadowing the chief event of the Odyssey, which is when Odysseus does come home and finds the suitors there and then has to deal with the suitors.
But he came home in disguise, right?
Yes, he does. Right. So there's complexity there. Yeah. And he comes home in disguise because if he comes home as himself, they're going to kill him.
And the wife didn't even recognize him either.
He was told to disguise himself from everyone, not to tell anyone. That's going to be a part of the humor of the story, actually. And she's going to turn the tables on Odysseus there as well. But I'm not going to give that away. But in response to this speech, now I don't have it on the page, so if you've got it in front of you, then in turn, the goddess gray-eyed Athena answered him, namely Zeus, son of Kronos, our father, O lordliest of the mighty, Aegisthus indeed has been struck down in a death well merited. Let any other man who does thus perish as he did. But the heart in me is torn for the sake of wise Odysseus, unhappy man who still, far from his friends, is suffering griefs on the sea-washed island, the navel of all the waters, a wooded island, and there a goddess has made her dwelling place. She is daughter of malignant Atlas, who has discovered all the depths of the sea and himself sustains the towering columns which bracket earth and sky and hold them together. This is his daughter. She detains the grieving unhappy man, and ever with soft and flattering words she works to charm him to forget Ithaca. And yet Odysseus, straining to get sight of the very smoke uprising from his own country, longs to die. But you, Olympian, the heart in you is heedless of him. Did not Odysseus do you grace by the ships of the Argives, making sacrifice in wide Troy? Why, Zeus, are you now so harsh with him? Athena speaking to her father. Then in turn Zeus, who gathers the clouds, made answer. My child, what sort of word escaped your teeth's barrier? How could I forget Odysseus the godlike, he who is beyond all other men in mind and who beyond... Note that she's goaded him. Athena knows how to speak to her dad to get her dad to do what she wants. It's the Greek thing, the head and the neck. He's the head, she's the neck. And look at this. Never mind. My big fat Greek wedding? No? Okay. All right. Well, anyway, she's the neck here. Beyond other men in mind, and who beyond others has given sacrifice to the gods, who hold wide heaven. It is the earth encircler Poseidon, who ever relentless nurses a grudge because of the Cyclops, whose eye he blinded. For Polyphemus, like a god whose power is greatest over all the Cyclops. Thausa, a nymph, was his mother, and she was daughter of Phorcys, lord of the barren salt water. She in the hollows of the caves had lain with Poseidon. For his sake, Poseidon, shaker of the earth, although he does not kill Odysseus, yet drives him back from the land of his fathers. But come, let us all who are here work out his homecoming, and see to it that he returns. Poseidon shall put away his anger. For all alone, and against the will of the other immortal gods united, he can accomplish nothing. So there's a resolution, and we are in another feature of the epic. We have a council of the gods. This always happens at the beginning of the epic as well. Council of the gods. So we have what's happening on Earth. We have a little backstory here. We have the invocation of the Muse. We have a hero. And now we have an invocation of the gods. These are all features of every epic. We're gonna look at a series of epics this semester, and we'll see that they have common features. And so when I said at the outset, what does an epic mean? Well, epic has certain conventions, but the conventions have metaphysical significance. They tell us about the nature of the gods, and therefore their relationship with mankind. They tell us a bit about the nature of the hero. They tell us that this is a story of divine importance, just by the sheer fact that they invoke the Muse. These make it an epic. So this is a theological story in some ways. And I would say that epics, at least in the Greco-Roman tradition, are theologizing. And that's why they're held to be of such importance. At any rate, what time have we got? 2 minutes. Have any questions here? I could just carry on, but I'm not going to. I'm going to get to books 1 to 4. You can see I'm already behind. This happens all the time. But the first 4 books are about this figure that we've not yet even heard of, but we're about to hear of. His name is Telemachus, Odysseus' son. So we heard about Orestes, the son of Agamemnon, who killed Aegisthus, the suitor of his mother. Now we're going to meet Telemachus, and we're going to see the other suitors. She has been faithful. So when I said it's a foil, there's a contrast between 2 types here. There's one hero who gets slain when he comes home, and then there's a hero who's not yet come home. What's going to happen to him? What is his son going to do? What's his wife going to do? What are the suitors going to do? But we can see there's a parallel between the 2 being set up here. Yes, one final comment or question, sir.
You said that Athena was essentially rallying up her father when she spoke to him.
She uses rhetoric to achieve an end, yes.
And he replies to her, what has escaped your teeth haven't? And then later, I think it's in the 4th book, Telemachus, he is dubious of his success, and that he's saying that, hey, my father's already dead, we're not going to make it. And then Athena says the same thing to him.
Same phrase. So this is one of the features of the oral epic, so thank you. What has escaped your teeth's barrier is a stock phrase. It has a certain meter to it, and it's used to say, why did you blurt that out, dummy? It's the words have escaped your teeth's barrier. It has a certain line length, and it preserves the meter. And again, the white-armed goddess has a certain meter to it, and they throw it in there, and sometimes it's Athena, sometimes it's Pallas Athena. It's one of the marks of an oral epic. So there are certain phrases that keep recurring, and I think meter is one of the main reasons for it. Yes?
Should we consider this as Telemachus also trying to rile up Athena to aid him in his journey? Or?
Telemachus?
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't know she's there. She doesn't know it's Athena.
Yeah.
He doesn't know it's Athena.
It's not like a parallel.
No, he has no idea who it is he's speaking to.
Doesn't it say though that like he knows that it's a god of some sort?
Yes.
So why doesn't she reveal himself to, like herself to him?
It's the nature of wisdom to keep your counsel.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to tell people everything that you're thinking. Some of us need to learn that. I may think that what you've said is really stupid. I don't have to say that was really stupid. I tend to do that, right? I tend to be a little bit too open with my thoughts. You don't want to do that. You want to sometimes show some discretion and the right time to say the right thing. She's going to model that for us. And Odysseus is going to be the great human model of this. So, and he's going to be suffering terribly, and he's going to want to blurt out and say this, or reveal that he's Odysseus. Like somebody hits him, he can put the guy down with one hit. If he does that, they're going to know he's not a beggar as he appears to be. He is a...
But then there was a plot to kill the son, Odysseus' son,
Yes?
but that didn't work out. And
That's because Athena intervenes as mentor and sends him away.
yeah, okay.
So Athena's on the side of Odysseus' house. No, it's and not just Odysseus, it's everyone in the house. She favors...
She helped him to kill the 108 suitors.
She did also. Yes, she's there in the fight. You've read ahead. That's good. I'm done for today. Oh, one final thing.